Welcome to Eon Cinema, your destination for endless entertainment and unforgettable movie moments. Discover exciting films, inspiring stories, and cinematic journeys across every genre. Whether you love action, drama, thrillers, or timeless favorites, there's always something waiting for you here. Sit back, enjoy the experience, and let Eon Cinema bring the magic of movies to your screen. The Untouchables is a 1987 American crime film directed by Brian De Palma, produced by Art Linson, and written by David Mamet. The film stars Kevin Costner, Charles Martin Smith, Andy Garcia, Robert De Niro, and Sean Connery. Set in Chicago in 1930 during Prohibition, the story follows Elliot Ness, played by Kevin Costner, as he assembles a team known as the Untouchables to take down notorious crime boss Al Capone, portrayed by Robert De Niro. The film marks the fourth collaboration between De Niro and De Palma, following Greetings, De Niro's first leading feature film role, The Wedding Party, and Hi, Mom. The screenplay is loosely inspired by Elliot Ness and Oscar Frehley's 1957 book The Untouchables and the real-life events behind it. Although much of the film's story was heavily fictionalized, the film's Academy Award-nominated and Grammy Award-winning score was composed by legendary composer Ennio Morricone and also incorporates period music by Duke Ellington. The Untouchables premiered in New York City on June 2, 1987, before receiving a wider release from Paramount Pictures on June 3. The film went on to gross approximately $187 million worldwide and earned generally positive reviews from critics. It received 4 Academy Award nominations, with Sean Connery winning the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. He also received the Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor. The story begins in 1930, during the height of Prohibition. Notorious Chicago gangster Al Capone has built a powerful criminal empire by supplying illegal liquor and controlling much of the city through fear, violence, and corruption. Bureau of Prohibition agent Elliot Ness is assigned to stop Capone's operations. His first major attempt involves raiding a warehouse containing liquor shipments from Canada. However, the operation quickly falls apart when corrupt police officers secretly warn Capone about the raid. Realizing that he cannot defeat Capone from within a system filled with corruption, Ness soon crosses paths with veteran Irish-American police officer James Malone. Unlike many of his fellow officers, Malone refuses to tolerate the corruption surrounding him and offers to help Ness take on Capone. Ness suggests finding a man from the police academy who has not yet been corrupted by Capone and still believes in the ideals of law enforcement. They recruit Italian-American trainee George Stone, born Giuseppe Pedri, whose excellent marksmanship and strong sense of integrity make him an ideal addition to the team. Joined by accountant Oscar Wallace, the group successfully raids one of Capone's liquor warehouses, gaining positive attention from the public. The press soon gives them a fitting nickname, the Untouchables. During a team dinner and organizational meeting, Capone brutally kills the warehouse manager with a baseball bat as a warning to his other subordinates. Wallace discovers that Capone has failed to file an income tax return for 4 years, since Capone's criminal network has effectively protected him from prosecution for his other crimes. Wallace suggests building a tax evasion case against him. Corrupt Alderman John O'Shea offers Ness a bribe to abandon the investigation, but Ness refuses to back down. After Capone's enforcer, Frank Nitti, threatens Ness's family, Ness immediately moves his pregnant wife, Catherine, and their daughter to a safe house for their protection. Later, with assistance from Canadian Mounties, Ness and his team raid a liquor shipment crossing the Canadian border. They kill several gangsters and capture a Capone bookkeeper named George, who eventually agrees to testify against his employer. Back in Chicago, Nitti disguises himself as a police officer and murders Wallace and George inside the elevator of the police station. He then leaves behind a threatening message for Ness. Furious over the killings, Ness confronts Capone at the Lexington Hotel. However, Malone intervenes and urges him to concentrate on convincing the district attorney to keep the charges against Capone alive. Ness and Malone discover that Police Chief Mike Dorsett had betrayed Wallace and George. Malone forces Dorsett to reveal the hiding place of Capone's accountant, Walter Payne. That evening, Capone's henchman known as the Bodhi driver breaks into Malone's apartment. Malone manages to chase him away with a shotgun, but Nitti suddenly ambushes Malone with a Thompson submachine gun. Ness and Stone arrive moments later and find Malone mortally wounded. They are devastated when he dies, but before his death, Malone manages to tell them which train Payne will take to leave Chicago. At Chicago Union Station, Ness and Stone wait for Payne's arrival. While there, Ness notices a young mother struggling to climb the station's steps with 2 suitcases and her baby in a carriage. Ness decides to help her. However, just as they reach the top of the stairs, the gangsters guarding Payne, including the Bodhi driver, arrive. A violent shootout erupts, putting innocent civilians in danger. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Ness and Stone manage to capture Payne alive. They also kill the Bodhi driver and the other gangsters while keeping the mother and her child safe. When Payne later testifies at Capone's trial, Ness notices that Capone appears unusually calm and confident. Ness then spots Nitti carrying a gun inside the courtroom and has a bailiff remove him. Outside, Ness searches Nitti and discovers a note from Chicago Mayor William Hale Thompson that effectively gives Nitti permission to carry the weapon. Ness becomes frustrated, but then finds a matchbook in Nitti's coat with Malone's address written inside. He immediately realizes that Nitti was responsible for Malone's murder. Panicking, Nitti pulls his gun and shoots the bailiff before escaping to the courthouse roof. Ness eventually catches him and prepares to take him into custody. But when Nitti insults Malone's memory and boasts that he will never be convicted for the murder, Ness loses control. In a moment of rage, he throws Nitti from the roof, killing him and avenging both Wallace and Malone. Back in the courtroom, Stone gives Ness a list recovered from Nitti's coat. It reveals that every juror in Capone's trial is secretly on Capone's payroll, explaining why Capone had seemed so confident from the beginning. Ness secretly convinces the judge to replace Capone's jury with one currently hearing an unrelated divorce case. The judge agrees after Ness cleverly tricks him into believing that his own name is also included on Capone's payroll. This prompts Capone's lawyer to enter a guilty plea against Capone's wishes. As Capone furiously objects in a violent outburst, Ness victoriously taunts him by repeating Malone's motto, "Never stop fighting until the fight is done." In his defeat, Capone finally learns the lesson. Capone is ultimately convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison. On the day of Capone's sentencing, Ness closes his office and meets with Stone to say goodbye. As a farewell gift, he gives Stone Malone's St. Jude medallion and Callahan's key. As Ness leaves the police station, a reporter asks what he plans to do after the probable repeal of Prohibition. Ness simply replies, "I think I'll have a drink," before walking away. Ned Tannen spent years trying to acquire the rights to Eliot Ness's life story while working as an executive at Universal Pictures during the 1970s and 1980s. After becoming head of motion picture production at Paramount Pictures, which owned the film and television rights to Ness's memoir, The Untouchables, Tannen immediately hired Art Linson to begin developing a film adaptation. Linson had no interest in adapting the ABC television series based on Ness's book. Instead, he wanted to create a more serious and authentic portrayal of Ness's career in Chicago. Linson hired playwright David Mamet to write an original screenplay for the film. Most of Mamet's script was retained, although director Brian De Palma made minor changes during production to accommodate new locations. For example, the famous sequence paying homage to the Potemkin stairs from Battleship Potemkin, 1925, was originally set in a hospital but was moved to Chicago Union Station, a month after the film's release. De Palma downplayed his own contribution to the screenplay. He explained that, as a writer himself, he did not like taking credit for work he had not done. He said he had not developed the script himself. Instead, Mamet incorporated some of his ideas while leaving others out. De Palma viewed the screenplay more clinically, treating it as material that needed to be shaped through adjustments to individual scenes. However, he felt that the script's moral dimension was already established, and his role was to bring that vision to life using his directing skills. For De Palma, working within someone else's vision was also a valuable creative discipline. As he put it, stepping into another person's shoes allows the director to move beyond personal obsessions and serve the story as a whole. The character of IRS agent Oscar Wallace was partially based on Frank J. Wilson, the IRS criminal investigator who spent years tracking Capone's financial activities before bringing charges against him. Unlike Wallace, Wilson survived the investigation and later became involved in the Lindbergh kidnapping case. Linson and De Palma wanted Ness to be portrayed more tenderly than Robert Stack's tough version of the character from the 1950s television series. They envisioned Ness as a vulnerable family man rather than simply a hardened lawman. De Palma initially wanted Don Johnson to play Elliot Ness, Mickey Rourke, Jeff Bridges, William Hurt, Harrison Ford, and Michael Douglas also turned down the role. In 1985, Variety reported that Jack Nicholson had been cast as Ness, but he was ultimately replaced by Kevin Costner. While preparing for the role, Costner met with former FBI agent and Untouchable wallpaper Wolf at his home in Lincolnwood. The meeting gave Costner a historical background and helped him understand Ness's mannerisms. Robert De Niro was De Palma's first choice to portray Al Capone. However, it was initially uncertain whether De Niro would be available because of his involvement in the Broadway production Cuba and his Teddy Bear. De Niro also wanted to gain around 30 pounds, or 14 kilograms, for the role. According to De Palma, De Niro was particularly concerned about the shape of his face for the character. De Palma met with Bob Hoskins to discuss the role in case De Niro was unavailable. Once De Niro accepted the part, De Palma sent Hoskins a $20,000 check along with a thank you note. Hoskins reportedly called De Palma and jokingly asked whether there were any other films he did not want him to appear in. Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando were also considered as alternatives in case neither De Niro nor Hoskins could take the role. De Niro researched Capone by reading extensively about him and studying historical footage. He also requested an additional scene for his character and had Capone's original suits and silk underwear recreated for him to make the portrayal more authentic. De Niro was paid $2 million for the role. Patricia Clarkson was cast as Ness's wife, Catherine, marking her film debut. A young John Barrowman also appears in the film in an uncredited role as a street person. Principal photography began on August 18, 1986, in Chicago, Illinois. This is where Ness's story begins as he assembles his team of Untouchables, determined to bring down Al Capone. The production used several notable Chicago locations, including the Rookery Building as Ness's police headquarters, the LaSalle Street, the DuSable Bridge, the Chicago Cultural Center, the Opera House, the courthouse lobby, and locations used for the famous rooftop chase. Other locations included the Blackstone Hotel for the mob banquet, Our Lady of Sorrows Basilica for the church scenes, and Chicago Union Station for the railway shootout. The Lexington Hotel, which served as Capone's residence, had been closed since 1980. As a result, the film recreated the location using 3 different sites. Roosevelt University provided the exterior and lower lobby, while Capone's suite was filmed in the upper foyer of the Chicago Theater. A warehouse on Chicago's west side was also converted into a soundstage. In August 1986, Paramount Pictures contacted Gary Wonderwald of the Montana Film Commissioner's office, hoping to find a 1930s-era bridge that could stand in for a border crossing between the United States and Canada. Wonderwald recommended the Hardy Bridge, which crosses the Missouri River near the small town of Cascade, southwest of Great Falls. From October 6 to October 20, the bridge was closed to traffic so the production could film the dramatic shootout sequence. 25 local residents were recruited to ride on horseback as members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The crew also constructed cabins and summer homes along the river. Around 600 trees were transported from the Lincoln and Callis Hill areas and planted within just a day and a half. Several vehicles from the 1920s and 1930s were rented from ranchers in Conrad and Great Falls to complete the period setting. Although the actual filming took approximately 10 days, the production reserved the bridge for a longer period to accommodate possible delays. Hundreds of people were also allowed to watch the filming from a nearby field. The railway station shootout is a deliberate homage to the famous Odessa Steps sequence from Sergei Eisenstein's 1925 silent classic Battleship Potemkin. The sequence was later parodied in the 1994 comedy Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult, which also features a dream sequence. Although The Untouchables is inspired by historical events, Much of the movie is fictionalized or historically inaccurate. The raid at the Canada-United States border never actually happened, and neither did the courthouse or railway station shootouts. Ness also did not kill Frank Nitti. In reality, Nitti died by suicide in 1943, 12 years after the Capone trial, on the day before he was scheduled to appear in court. In reality, Ness and his Untouchables had very little to do with Capone's eventual tax evasion conviction. That case was largely orchestrated by U.S. Attorney George Q. Johnson and IRS agent Frank J. Wilswain, who served as the inspiration for the character Oscar Wallace, played by Charles Martin Smith. Wilson, however, was never actually a member of the Untouchables. The scene in which Capone beats Lieutenant John Broxide to death with a baseball bat is based on an urban legend that historians generally doubt ever occurred. However, Capone was reportedly involved in the deaths of John Scully's, Albert Anselmi, and Joseph Guinta after he discovered that the three men were planning to betray him. According to reports, Capone invited them to a dinner party and had them beaten to death. The film also changes details of Ness's personal life. His wife is named Catherine, played by Patricia Clark Swain, and the couple have a young daughter named Caitlin Montgomery. In real life, Ness's wife at the time was named Edna, and the couple had no children. Ness would later adopt a son named Robert. The Untouchables opened on June 3, 1987, in 1,012 theaters across the United States and Canada. It earned $10,023,094 during its opening weekend, ranking as the sixth highest opening weekend of 1987. The film eventually grossed $76.2 million in the United States and Canada. According to producer Art Linson, audience polling showed that approximately 50% of the moviegoers were women. Linson noted that violent films generally attracted a predominantly male audience, but The Untouchables also dealt with themes of redemption and relationships. Because of those emotional elements, audiences were more willing to overlook the film's heightened violence. Internationally, the movie earned another $110.5 million. Bringing its worldwide total to approximately $186.7 million. Critics also responded positively to The Untouchables. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an 83% approval rating based on 75 critics, with an average score of 7.60 out of 10. The site's critical consensus describes Brian De Palma's gangster thriller as visually polished while praising its artistic touches, period setting, and strong ensemble cast. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted score of 79 out of 100 based on 16 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the movie an average grade of F scale. Vincent Canby of the New York Times gave the film a positive review, describing it as a smashing achievement and praising its combination of vulgarity, violence, humor, and breathtaking visual beauty. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times praised the action sequences and locations but was less impressed with David Mamet's screenplay and Brian De Palma's direction. Ebert considered the portrayal of Al Capone as arrogant and childish, particularly his behavior in public and in court, one of the film's biggest disappointments. At the same time, he strongly praised Sean Connery's performance. Al Hinson of The Washington Post also criticized De Palma's direction. He argued that the director's fascination with spectacular visuals sometimes overwhelmed the storytelling, suggesting that De Palma's interest in film as a visual medium had taken priority over the narrative itself. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker was similarly critical. She argued that the movie was not a great film because it was too conventional and morally comfortable. However, she still considered it a highly entertaining audience movie and an enjoyable potboiler. Richard Sklovtime praised Mamet's screenplay for being concise and efficient, while noting that De Palma's direction was equally economical. He described the result as a layered, energetic film that moves with confidence and momentum. Time ultimately ranked The Untouchables among the best films of 1987. Adrian Turner of Radio Times awarded the film 5 stars, praising David Mamet's sharp dialogue, Ennio Morricone's soaring score, and the impressive production design. For many viewers, however, one of the movie's biggest attractions remains Sean Connery's Oscar-winning performance as the experienced Irish-American cop who teaches Ness how to survive in a corrupt city. Despite winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, Connery's accent became a subject of criticism. In a 2003 Empire poll, his performance was voted first place for worst film accent because his Scottish accent remained noticeably strong. The Untouchables arrived in theaters on June 3, 1987, just over a month before my 16th birthday, and I still remember how excited I was to see it. Every television spot immediately grabbed my attention. I read the movie's novelization, as well as Elliot Ness's The Untouchables, the real story. I also watched the old Robert Stack television series whenever I had the opportunity in my small rural town. In other words, seeing this movie felt like a major event at the time. I have lost count of how many times I've watched it since, and after revisiting it for the first time in quite a while, I can still say that it has the power to excite me. Brian De Palma's Prohibition-era gangster film draws inspiration from a variety of sources while giving the material his unmistakable visual style. At the same time, the movie incorporates several classic filmmaking techniques and storytelling elements. The film became a major success, performing well at the box office and receiving significant recognition at the Academy Awards. It earned 4 Oscar nominations and won one, with Sean Connery taking home the award for Best Supporting Actor. Kevin Costner stars as Elliot Ness, a young and determined prohibition agent working in 1930s Chicago. The role was originally offered to Mickey Rourke. Ness is given what appears to be an impossible assignment: bring down Chicago's most powerful crime boss, Al Capone, played by Robert De Niro. Capone effectively controls much of the city through violence, bribery, and his massive liquor distribution operation. Ness initially struggles during his liquor raids, and his early failures leave him close to becoming a laughingstock among the people of Chicago. But Ness eventually catches the attention of Jimmy Malone, a seasoned police officer played by Sean Connery. Malone has grown deeply frustrated with the widespread corruption within the city's law enforcement system, and he sees something in Ness that convinces him to help. Malone pushes Ness to go further, warning him that if he truly wants to stop Capone, he may have to get his hands dirty. The two bring 2 more recruits into their team: young Academy trainee and expert marksman George Stone, played by Andy Garcia, and Washington Bureau accountant Oscar Wallace, portrayed by Charles Martin Smith. Together, they begin striking at Capone's organization and gradually earn the nickname the Untouchables. But in De Palma's corrupt and violent Chicago, can anyone really be untouchable? Nearly 3 decades later, The Untouchables still hasn't lost any of its excitement or intensity. De Palma and screenwriter David Mamet create a fast-moving, high-energy story filled with police corruption, gangland violence, and relentless tension. And yes, there is plenty of graphic violence. At times, the movie feels like a classic gangster film, only for De Palma to suddenly hit us with a shocking burst of brutality. Those unexpected moments help give the film its distinctive and unforgettable tone. The production itself is outstanding. Cinematographer Stephen H. Burim captures the film with striking visual style, while several historic Chicago locations add authenticity to the setting. The costumes, production design, and overall atmosphere are equally impressive. Then there is Ennio Morricone's Grammy Award-winning score, which is simply magnificent. Who could forget the deep piano notes accompanied by the haunting cry of the harmonica? Like so many other elements of the movie, Morricone's music is unforgettable. And what about the cast? A young Kevin Costner is perfectly suited to the role of Elliot Ness, bringing sincerity and determination to the character. Robert De Niro takes Al Capone to almost theatrical extremes, but that larger-than-life performance is also a huge part of the film's appeal. Then there's Sean Connery, who delivers one of the finest performances of his remarkable career. He is tough, bitter, charismatic, and completely commanding whenever he appears on screen. Andy Garcia is excellent as the quiet and reserved police trainee, while Billy Drago is wonderfully sinister as Frank Nitti. From top to bottom, the cast is exceptional. High expectations can often ruin a movie, but thankfully, that was not the case with The Untouchables. When I finally saw it in the summer of 1987, it delivered everything I had hoped for, and it was great to discover that the film still holds up after all these years. Some critics have picked the movie apart, criticizing everything from David Mamet's screenplay to Sean Connery's accent. neither bothered me. Instead, I see The Untouchables as a fantastic piece of entertainment that has barely aged at all and unquestionably one of Brian De Palma's finest films. I watched The Untouchables dozens of times during the summer of 1987 while working at a movie theater before heading off to college that fall. I remember being surprised by its mixed critical reception. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars, while Pauline Kael dismissed it as banal and morally comfortable. For me, however, there has never been a moment since my first viewing when I considered the movie anything less than a masterpiece. Its strange combination of sentimentality and sadism remains both compelling and fascinating. It is an extremely manipulative film, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. The meaning of the phrase "The Untouchables" has also been badly misunderstood, almost as much as Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA has sometimes been mistaken for a straightforward patriotic anthem. The name was never meant to suggest that Elliot Ness and the agents assigned to bring down Al Capone were physically untouchable or could never be threatened. Of course they could, and they were. De Palma and Mamet's masterful drama makes that painfully clear, most famously through Sean Connery's brutal death scene in the bathtub, which instantly became one of the most iconic moments in movie history and undoubtedly helped propel Connery toward his only Academy Award. Instead, The Untouchables refers to the fact that Ness and his team could not be bribed or bought. In 1930s Chicago, where countless police officers and politicians were taking money from the illegal profits of Prohibition, Ness and his men were outsiders who refused to become part of the corruption consuming the city. And, in a way, they were a gang themselves. The first major lesson Ness, a young and determined U.S. Treasury agent, learns is that he cannot fight Capone's Chicago organization through the ordinary tools of law enforcement and the justice system. Those institutions have already been compromised. To challenge Capone, Ness must create his own small team and operate outside the structures that have been poisoned by corruption. His self-appointed teacher in the Chicago way is Sean Connery's Malone, an aging beat cop whom Ness encounters one night after a disastrous liquor raid. Malone is close to retirement, probably around Connery's actual age of 57 when the film was made. He is bitter, weary, and one of the few police officers in Chicago who has refused to work for Capone. We learn surprisingly little about Malone's personal history throughout the movie. Ness never even learns his first name directly. We discover that it is Jim, or Jimmy, through Mike Dorset, played by Richard Bradford, a fellow Irishman who chooses to accept the corruption and go along with the system. Mike has risen to become a high-ranking officer, while Malone is still walking the streets. That contrast suggests that Malone may have started his career with plenty of idealism, only to have the years gradually burn it away, leaving behind the hardened cynicism like fresh meat left too long over a fire. And perhaps that is the thing you fear most, isn't it? Malone muses when he first refuses Ness a conscription effort. After decades of wishing you could do something about the mafia pulling all of the strings of power, he admits he has grown afraid now that he's presented with the actual opportunity, though he soon finds his misplaced mettle. Well, the Lord hates a coward. Malone spends so much time speaking in such pronouncements. It's almost as if he is carrying on an external dialogue with himself because he considers most others in Chicago to be idiots, evildoers, or weak-willed pawns. The casting of Kevin Costner to play Ness was quite controversial at the time. He seemed too young and wholesome, particularly when compared with the crusty Robert Stack's Deacon character in the 1959 TV show. The on-screen contrast with Connery, grim and weathered, was also stark. For the record, Costner was 32 when he played Ness and Stack was 40. The real-life Ness was just 27 in 1930, but I think the pairing of the old movie star with the young one works just as De Palma intended. He loves to mess around with genre expectations. By making Ness seem so impossibly pure, it lightens an otherwise very heavy, dramatic, and blood-soaked story. And although Ness eventually follows Malone's lessons, even committing murder and threatening a judge, we always music, see it as a good man leveraging on the lesser evil to combat the greater. De Palma leans into the portrayal of Ness as an incorruptible family man with the home scenes with wife Patricia Clarkson and young daughter that are so syrupy sweet with gauzy soft photography and aching string music. It flirts with parody, "It's nice to be married" is Nessa' repeated refrain, spoken either by him or to him. Speaking of the music, this is one of Ennio Morricone's most memorable scores. It actually seems like several scores with melodies and cadences that are completely divergent from one another. He rightfully received an Oscar nomination for it. There is the trilling music, a triumphant horn cue used for scenes where the Untouchables enjoy success. Mournful cellos and an aching sax soloist strike up when tragedy visits. Tense action is stirred up with a jaunty percussion-heavy piano played in low staccato pulses lasting just a few notes apiece, which also plays over the opening credits. Capone scenes are often accompanied by a jazzy, indulgent wah-wah of muted brass over bell-like bright tones. The film also got Academy Award nods for costumes and set decorations, which are absolutely superb and in many cases making use of real Chicago locations, and is stunning how did they do that redressings to make everything look nearly 60 years earlier. An egregious oversight was the lack of a nomination for the cinematography of Fast Even. Music, H. Burham, who had previously worked with De Palma on Body Double. Like Morricone's shape-shifting music, Burham's cameras, music, dance and pivoted in myriad different ways for various scenes, from sweeping overhead views to a circling around a table to steadicam shots representing the perspective of a killer. Both Capone and Ness are introduced from an obscured viewpoint, Capone from above, his face covered by a barber's hot towel as reporters wait to record his utterances. Ness from behind is his wife while he's reading a newspaper about the vicious bombing that killed a 10-year-old girl in one of the Chicago outfit's reprisals. There is the now iconic shootout at a Chicago Union Station, a slow-motion orgy of blood that De Palma borrowed from the Odessa Steps sequence in Eisenstein's battleship Potemkin, accompanied by Morricone's tinny circus lullaby. For my money, I favor the slow burn attention building of Malone being stalked inside his narrow shotgun house, the killer creeping from room to room. Robert De Niro had to be convinced to play Capone, putting on 30 pounds, shaving his hairline, and having a prosthetic scar splayed across his cheek. Though, in truth, music, it's barely visible. The real Capone loathed the nickname as Scarface and often wore makeup to conceal his riddled flesh. The result of a jealous tussle over a friend's wife. De Niro's garish suits were made by the same tailoring company that worked in all the real Capone's outfits. Costner and De Niro only have 2 scenes together, a verbal spat in the lobby of the lavish Lexington Hotel, where Capone made his unofficial home, and the final trial scene. Capone dismisses Ness, "You're nothing but a lot of talk and a badge," using that phrase both times, first as a taunt by a guy who knows he has the upper hand, and later as a powerless scumbag by someone who has just seen his entire empire crumble. In actuality, Ness and Capone never met. Though ostensibly based on Ness' autobiography, the movie bears little semblance to the historical record. The Untouchables work had little to do with the tax evasion charge that eventually brought Capone down, a legal tactic that had been in the works even before the unit was formed. Ness courageously intercepted or cut off large portions of the Chicago outfit's liquor distribution network, starving a Capone for cash and impeding his ability to bribe local officials and also protect himself. Screenwriter Mammoth, Music, then known mostly for his work as a playwright, wisely regarded Ness' book as a mere stepping-off point to tell an almost wholly fictionalized story. There's very little about the script that's factually accurate. Take Frank Nitti, the flamboyant personal bodyguard of Capone played by Billy Drago. With his shark-like stare and white suits, Nitti acts as a sadistic secondary antagonist. It's at his hands that Malone meets his fate, as well as music. Oscar Wallace, a dweebish treasury accountant played by Charles Martin Smith, whose enthusiastic embrace of the gun-toting aspects of law enforcement provides much comic relief. In the final step of Ness' journey into immoral ambiguity, he throws Nitti off the roof of the courthouse after capturing and disarming him, yielding to the assassin's taunts about Malone squealing like a stuck Irish pig in his final moments. As the villain falls to his death, Ness hollers after him, "Did he sound anything like that?" At the moment serves as both an action a movie hero cue and Ness' realization that he has stepped through a door he cannot pass back through. The real Nitti lived for nearly 2 decades after being convicted along with a Capone, his cousin, of tax charges, being released a few months later and actually taking over leadership of the outfit. He killed himself in a drunken depression upon being convicted again, and the music. First of 3 shots he fired toward his head merely passed through his fedora. De Palma recreates music. This memento with Ness shooting off Nitti's totemica hat during their chase and scuffle. It's a good analogy for the film's overall approach to historical fact, just enough to act as a flavorful garnish. I've quoted a lot of Mamet's dialogue in this essay and could easily go on much longer. It's one of the most quotable movies of the last 50 years. Music. Much of the language is deliberately arch and speechy. It's the sort of stuff actors wind themselves up to chew on. Probably the most famous is Mullen's talk with Ness inside a church in which he demands, "What are you prepared to do?" Words that also become his death rattle. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. There's also Capone's baseball speech in which he makes a seemingly humorous observation about the importance of teamwork to his lieutenants around a sumptuous dinner table before viciously beating one of them to death with a bat. Before this most recent viewing, I had never put it together that the victim is the guy in charge of the Post Officia Whiskey Depository, the site of Ness' first raid. Really though, the heart of the movie is summed up in the speech Ness gives in the judge's chambers right after killing Nitti. Having learned Capone's jury has been bribed, the judge refuses to take action. Music. Even as Ness fumes and bares his soul, there is only one way to deal with succumbing, that is hunt them down. I have forsworn myself. I have broken every lie I've sworn to uphold. I have become what I beheld and I am content that I have done right. This could have been a very cheesy moment and that dialogue in danger of coming out very stiff and inauthentic. But with all the death and mayhem that came before and Costner selling the hell out of the line, it just works. Ness wins. Music. Up. Off camera. Threatening to expose the judge as being on Capone's payroll even though his name does not appear in the ledger that captured that formed the basis of the tax case. The judge goes along, switching the juries to foil the jury bribing, suggesting that he was part of the payola chain after all, even if the evidence was absent here. The Elliot-ness of the Untouchables manages to wade through a veritably river of blood and human rot and retain his sense of wrong and right. It's not enough to fight the good fight, you have to be able to accept the most grievous losses necessary to ensure a final victory. Not this man. Ness pleads, pounding his hand on the floor as Malone spits out his last breaths in the red rasp, but I think both he and Malone knew this was predestined to happen. A blood oath, the old copper called it upon shaking the treasury man's hand, and such things are sealed in the letting of it. There is a moment in the Untouchables when a mobster doesn't want to talk to the law. He has just been captured by federal agents at the Canadian border while trying to run some booze down to Chicago for Al Capone. One of the guy's pals had been shot dead out on the porch. Music. He doesn't know his partner is dead. Sean Connery walks outside, grabs the corpse, props it up against a wall, says he's going to shoot the guy if he doesn't talk, and then puts a bullet into the corpse and drops it. Inside the cabin, the other mobster decides to talk. It's a moment of quick, brutal improvisation, and it has an energy that's lacking during most of the Untouchables. Music. Here is a movie about a Niro when law enforcement resembled gang warfare. The movie seems more interested in theater than in the war. The Untouchables has great costumes, great sets, great music, cars, great guns, great locations, and a few shots that absolutely capture the Prohibition era. But it does not have a great script, great performances, or great direction. The script is by David Mamet, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. It could have been by anybody. It doesn't have the Mamet touch. The conversational music, rhythms that carry a meaning beyond words. It also lacks any particular point of view about the material and in fact lacks the dynamic tension of many gangster movies written by less talented writers. Everything seems cut and dried, twice told. Music, preordained. The performances are an utter disappointment. The star of the movie is Kevin Costner as Elliot Ness, the straight arrow federal agent who vows a personal struggle against the Capone mob. Costner is fine for the role, but it's a thankless one, giving him little to do other than act grim and incorrigible. The script doesn't give him, and he doesn't provide, any of the little twists and turns of character that might have made Ness into an individual. But the big disappointment is Robert De Niro's Al Capone. All of the movie's Capone segments seem cut off from the rest of the story. They're like regal set pieces dropped in from time to time. De Niro comes on screen with great dramatic and musical flourish, strikes an attitude, says a music line, and that's basically the whole idea. There isn't a glimmer of a notion of what made this man tick. This Al Capone, who is such an organizational genius that he founded an industry and became a millionaire while still a young man. The best performance in the movie is by Sean Connery as an Irish-American cop who signs on as Ness's right-hand man and seems, inexplicably, to know everything about the mob and its liquor business. Connery brings a human element to the character. He seems to have had an existence apart from the legend of the Untouchables. And when he's on screen we can believe, briefly, that the Prohibition era was inhabited by people, not caricatures. What's good about the movie is the physical production itself. There's a shot of Chicago's Los Angeles Street Canyon, all decked out with the period cars and extras. That's sensational. And there are a lot of other nice touches, like Capone's hotel headquarters and the courtroom where his trial is held. But even the good use of sets and locations is undermined by Brian De curiously lead-footed direction, curious music, because he is usually the most nimble and energetic of directors. Look, for example, at an early scene where Ness and his men are staking out a gang headquarters, and Ness spots a Nazi photographer snooping around. The editing is so clumsy that we can't understand why the mob doesn't see Ness and the photographer, and the photographer himself stays around for the whole picture as an implausible distraction, who somehow is always able to turn up whenever has needed. Chicago's bootlegging battles were already a legend by the 1930s. When the Warner Brothers turned them into the gangster movie industry, directors have been struggling ever since to invest them with life and free them from cliches. The best film about the era remains the uncut original version of Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America. De Palma's Untouchables, like that vast series that inspired it, depends more on cliches than on artistic convention. An early scene in The Untouchables sets the stage for how director Brian De Palma establishes a nostalgic idol and then shatters it throughout the film. In 1930, just under the L train in Chicago's Wriggleville, a 10-year-old girl crosses the street into a corner pub to fetch milk in her mother's bucket. Ford Model Ts pass on the street, a train car runs overhead, and a few scattered pedestrians populate the sidewalks. It's a sublime recreation of old Chicago. Inside, the girl waits at the counter as the owner finishes his conversation with the man, saying he wants no green beer for his pub. When the owner, music, finishes, he fills the girl's bucket and asks about her mother, but she notices another man in a white suit has just left his briefcase behind. Music, mister, she shouts. You forgot your briefcase. The man in music, the white suit slithers away in a rush. All at once, this scene reminds us of Alfred Hitchcock's Sabotage from 1936. Music and the young boy who unknowingly carried a bomb before it exploded and our stomachs drop, standing in the doorway holding the briefcase. The girl, music, along with the pub detonates into a blaze. This is indeed a scene straight out of old Chicago in 1930. The most violent city of the Prohibition era just before the repeal of the Volstead Music Act. The next morning, Catherine Nessa finishes packing her husband's lunch and approaches him in their den. He reads the headline about the bombing. She tells him, "Now it's time to go to work," and kisses him goodbye. Released in 1987, De Palma's film captures our reminiscences of an era that Hollywood has since glamorized in the minds of moviegoers. It was a time that never existed when a good and evil were clearly drawn opposites and the heroes always stopped the bad guys, no matter how fascinating the gangster lifestyle was. Shortly after Elliot Ness brought down the Prohibition mobster Al Capone, Story is about Ness group of hand-picked, incorruptible untouchables became the stuff of romanticized storytelling. Americans invited these stories into their homes from 1959 to 1963 with an ABC television series of the same name. Music, starring Robert Stack as Ness. Based on the 1957 book which Ness co-wrote with Oscar Freire, the film reinforces those dreamy visions of Ness heroism even while De Palma and screenwriter David Mamet deconstruct the black and white conflict and complicate the moral stakes. De Palma and Mamet serve as iconic lasts. Music, suggesting that this was not a battle between good and evil, rather it was a battle in which Ness was forced to become more like Capone to defeat him. The Untouchables remains an uncommon sort of gangster drama aesthetically supporting the Hollywood vision of a glamorous era of attractive violence and then thematically tearing that vision apart. Paramount Pictures, who own the rights to the Untouchables television series, put producer Art Linson in charge of developing the film. Linson's first choice of director was De Palma, for whom the Untouchables represented a crucial point in his career. De Palma's last two films, Body Double, 1984, and Wise Guys, 1986, music flopped at the box office, and he needed something that would show the studios he could direct a profitable picture. Only then could De Palma once again explore his more independent, personal features, such as Blowout or Dress to Kill. In Hollywood, 3 strikes and you're out, he told Linson. The producer also hired his first choice writer, David Mamet, who earned an Oscar in 1983 for his work on The Verdict. And wanted the material to be independent of the television series. Mamet instead revisited Ness' original text, incorporating actual accounts of the Untouchables into the screen story, and being a Chicagoan, he included some of his own research. When Paramount officially offered De Palma directing duties, the studio entrusted him with a $20 million budget, and much of it was spent on the cast. Sean Connery had been attracted to the production because of Mamet, then a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright for Glengarry Glen Ross. Moreover, music, Connery's character Malone was a juicy supporting role filled with quotable, tough dialogue. For Capone, De Palma desperately wanted a Robert De Niro. Bob Hoskins was his backup choice. The two had worked together in the 1960s on several small features. The Wedding Party, Greetings, Music, and Hi, Mom. Prior to De Niro's surging popularity and high critical praise, the actor would put on 25 pounds, raise his hairline, and wear a bodysuit for the role, portraying a more contented, Garcia Capone. As the rest of the cast fell into place, De Palma interviewed several actors for the role of Ness. His first choice being Mel Gibson, who had a scheduling conflict due to Lethal Weapon. At the time, Kevin Costner wasn't yet a star. He impressed in Silverado, 1985, but De Palma was reluctant to hire him. A young Kevin Costner is the perfect fit. Music, for an earnest and determined Ness. De Niro hams it up to epic levels. Of course, he goes really, really big, but he is a ton of fun. And then you have Sean Connery, who gives one of the best performances of his impressive career. He's surly, he's tough, and he has a ton of charisma. Garcia is really good as the soft-spoken cop in Training, and Billy Drago's gloriously evil in his version of Frank Nitti. The cast is fabulous from top to bottom. High expectations can often be a death knell. Thankfully, that wasn't the case with The Untouchables. It more than delivered. When I finally saw it during the summer of 1987, it was nice to sigh. Music, that it still holds up after all these years. Some have picked the film apart, pointing to everything from Mamet's script to Connery's accent. Neither were an issue for me. Instead, I see this as a fabulous bit of entertainment that hasn't aged a bit and is unquestionably one of Brian De Palma's best. I saw The Untouchables dozens of times during the summer of 1987, working in a movie theater before heading off to college that fall. I remember being astounded at the middling critical reception to it. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars and Pauline Kael called it banal and morally comfortable. To me, there has never been a second since I first saw it I regarded the movie as anything less than a masterpiece. Music. Its odd but intertwined mix of sentiment and sadism is still compelling and puzzling. It's an extremely manipulative film, and I mean that as the highest compliment. The whole meaning of the phrase "the Untouchables" has been horrendously misplaced. Music, almost on par with Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA being co-opted as a patriotic ballad. It was not meant to indicate Elliot Ness and his squad of agents commissioned with bringing down mobster Al Capone could not be harmed or threatened. Of course they could. Music, and did so in Brian De Palma and David Mamet's masterful drama, most famously, of course, with Sean Connery's bathtub blood death scene, instantly one of the most iconic in cinematic history, and which no doubt put him over the top to win his only Academy Award. Rather, the phrase is supposed to indicate that Ness and his gang could not be bribed or bought off. In a 1930s Chicago where virtually every cop and politician was on the take from the illicit proceeds of Prohibition, they were seen as outsiders who could remain untouched by the pox of corruption pervading all corners of the city. And they were a gang. The very first lesson Ness, a young and driven U.S. Treasury agent, learns is that he can't fight Capone's Chicago outfit using the normal levers of law enforcement and jurisprudence. He has to form his own gang to oppose Capone's and operate outside the rules and structures that have been poisoned. His self-described tutor in the Chicago way is Connery's Malone, a tired old beat cop he happens across one night after his first spectacularly botched liquor raid. Malone is nearly at pension age, probably about Connery's real 57 years at the time the film was made, bitter and one of the few men in blue not on Capone's payroll. We actually learn very little background information about Malone during the course of the movie. Ness never even speaks his first name, though we learn it is Jim or Jimmy through talking with Mike Dorset. Richard Bradford, a fellow contemporary Irish who learned to take the graft and go along. Mike is now a high-ranking officer, while Malone is still walking the streets, indicating he probably started off with a great deal of idealism but the years have smoked down to a hard cynicism, like fresh beef left too long over the coals. That's the thing you fear? Music, isn't it? Malone muses when he first refuses Ness' conscription effort. After decades of wishing you could do something about the mafia pulling all the strings of power, he admits he's grown afraid now that he's presented with the actual opportunity, though he soon finds his misplaced mettle. Well, the Lord hates a coward. Malone spends so much time speaking in such pronouncements. It's almost as if he is carrying on an external dialogue with himself because he considers most others in Chicago to be idiots, evildoers, or weak-willed pawns. The casting of Kevin Costner to play Ness was quite controversial at the time. He seemed too young and wholesome, particularly when compared with the crusty Robert Stack's take on the character in the 1959 TV show. The on-screen contrast with Connery, grim and weathered, was also stark. For the record, Costner was 32 when he played Ness and Stack was 40. The real-life Ness was just 27 in 1930. But I think the pairing of the old movie star with the young one works just as De Palma intended. He loves to mess around with genre expectations. By making Ness seem so impossibly pure, it lightens an otherwise very heavy, dramatic, and blood-soaked story. And although Ness eventually follows Malone's lessons, even committing murder and threatening a judge, we always, music, see it as a good man leveraging the lesser evil to combat the greater. De Palma leans into the portrayal of Ness as an incorruptible family man with home scenes with wife Patricia Clarkson and young daughter that are so syrupy sweet with gauzy soft photography and aching string music. Music, it flirts with parody. It's nice to be married is Ness' repeated refrain, spoken either by him or to him. Speaking of the music, this is one of Ennio Morricone's most memorable scores. It actually seems like several scores with melodies and cadences that are completely divergent from one another. He rightfully received an Oscar nomination for it. There is the trilling, music, triumphant horn cue used for scenes where the Untouchables enjoy success. Mournful cellos and an aching sax solo strike up when tragedy visits. Tense action is stirred up with a jaunty percussion-heavy piano played in low staccato pulses lasting just a few notes apiece, which also plays over the opening credits. Capone scenes are often accompanied by jazzy, indulgent wah-wah of muted brass over bell-like bright tones. The film also got Academy Award nods for costumes and set decorations, which are absolutely superb and in many cases make use of real Chicago locations and stunning how did they do that redressings to make everything look nearly 60 years earlier. An egregious oversight was the lack of a nomination for the cinematography of Stephen Music H. Burham, who had previously worked with De Palma on Body Double. Like Morricone's shape-shifting music, Burham's cameras, music, dance and pivot in myriad different ways for various scenes. From sweeping overhead views to circling around a table to Steadicam shots representing the perspective of a killer. Both Capone and Ness are introduced from an obscured viewpoint, Capone from above, his face covered by a barber's hot towel as reporters wait to record his utterances. Ness from behind is his wife while he's reading a newspaper about the vicious bombing that killed a 10-year-old girl in one of the Chicago Outfit's reprisals. There is the now iconic shootout at Chicago Union Station. A slow-motion orgy of blood that De Palma borrowed from the Odessa Steps sequence in Eisenstein's battleship Potemkin, accompanied by Morricone's tinny circus lullaby. For my money, I favor the slow-burn tension-building of Malone being stalked inside his narrow shotgun house, the killer creeping from room to room. Robert De Niro had to be convinced to play Capone, putting on 30 pounds, shaving his hairline, and having a prosthetic scar splayed across his cheek, though. In truth, music, it's barely visible. The real Capone loathed the nickname Scarface and often wore makeup to conceal his riddled flesh, the result of a jealous tussle over a friend's wife. De Niro's garish suits were made by the same tailoring company that worked on the real Capone's outfits. Costner and De Niro only have 2 scenes together, a verbal spat in the lobby of the lavish Lexington Hotel, where Capone made his unofficial home. And the final trial scene. Capone dismisses Ness, "You're nothing but a lot of talk and a badge," using that phrase both times, first as a taunt by a guy who knows he has the upper hand, and later as a powerless comeback by someone who has just seen his entire empire crumble. In actuality, Ness and Capone never met. Though ostensibly based on Ness' autobiography, the movie bears little semblance to the historical record. The Untouchables work had little to do with the tax evasion charge that eventually brought Capone down, a legal tactic that had been in the works even before the unit was formed. Ness courageously intercepted or cut off large portions of the Chicago Outfit's liquor distribution network, starving Capone for cash and impeding his ability to bribe local officials and thus protect himself. Screenwriter Mahmoud Music, then known mostly for his work as a playwright, wisely regarded Ness' book as a mere stepping-off point to tell an almost wholly fictionalized story. There's very little about the script that's factually accurate. Take Frank Nitti, the flamboyant personal bodyguard of Capone played by Billy Drago. With his shark-like stare and white suits, Nitti acts as a sadistic secondary antagonist. It's at his hands that Malone meets his fate, as well as music. Oscar Wallace, the dweebish Treasury accountant played by Charles Martin Smith, whose enthusiastic embrace of the gun-toting aspects of law enforcement provides much comic relief. In the final step of Ness' journey into moral ambiguity, he throws Nitti off the roof of the courthouse after capturing and disarming him, yielding to the assassin's taunts about Malone squealing like a stuck Irish pig in his final moments. As the villain falls to his death, Ness hollers after him, "Did he sound anything like that?" The moment serves as both an action movie hero cue and Ness' realization that he has stepped through a door he cannot pass back through. In this case, music. It's the camaraderie amongst the team put together by federal agent Elliot Ness to bring down criminal Al Capone. That team was nicknamed the Untouchables, FYI, as it was claimed that they never took bribes and were incorruptible. These guys here, I love them. Yeah, even Sean Connery was likable. Anal bomb cover. He was the main partner to Ness and my favorite character. His Irish accent, music, seemed a bit dodgy, but that's Connery for you. He won an Oscar for this role anyway. Yay. So, I guess it didn't matter. And I've never been a huge fan of Garcia, but he was super cool in this. To be honest, I thought the only weak one in this film was Robert De Niro as Al Capone. I liked that his part was smaller than he expected. This is meant to be the story of Ness and the Untouchables. After all, he's just done the gangster thing much better in other movies. Sorry. Music. To Niro fans. There are some of the great iconic scenes in this film as well. such as the bit with the baby buggy that most of you will have seen in clips over the years as I had. Oh, and I've not even mentioned Kevin Costner as Elliot Ness. I think we all got pretty sick of Fat Costner by the mid-90s, right? Music. I honestly would happily never watch him in another movie again, which is probably a little unfair, but **it. He won't be reading this. However, I have to admit that he was pretty perfect in the role of Ness, so I have zero complaints. Good job, Kevin Costner. I just want to end this with what my hubby said about the movie when we are discussing it, and I think Costner ties into this a bit. This movie would be considered more of a classic up there with the likes of The Godfather if it had been made in the 70s instead of the 80s. As much as I love the 80s, it didn't produce a lot of all-time classics, and the gritty look and feel of 70s filmmaking would have really given this film the extra edge it seems to be missing. Music. Plus, there's the fact that Kevin Costner is in it. He just doesn't scream star of all time. Music. Gangster classic to me. Why am I so anti-Costner? I have no idea. He was good in this. I like this a hell of a lot and find it odd that it isn't more highly rated. It's not even in the IMDb Top 250 comedy music, which I think it deserves to be. Quite frankly, it deserved a Best Picture Oscar nomination as well. These were the nominees that year. The last. Music, Emperor, Broadcast News, A Fatal Attraction, Hope and Glory, and Moonstruck. What? Okay. I've not seen Winner the Last Emperor, but The Untouchables is better than all the other nominees, although I have a soft spot for Fatal Attraction. Stupid Oscars. If you haven't seen The Untouchables and you're interested in doing the blind spot thing, I'd recommend adding it to your list. It's well worth the watch based on the real-life Prohibition-era federal agent Elliot Ness and his takedown of the iconic gangster Al Capone. The Untouchables is a true story that opens our 7th annual Mob Movie March. Nominated for 4 Academy Awards and winning 1, The Untouchables is a character-driven film propelled by the megastars involved portraying epic figures from history. Side note, it also serves as my 500th movie buff review. The setting is one that reeks of crime and corruption. It's Chicago and the year is 1930. Elliot Ness, Kevin Costner. Music. Also established a team of trustworthy agents in an effort to bring down the ruthless Al Capone. Robert De Niro. Director Brian De Palma has a lot of great tools to work with in terms of talent and story. He adds an array of visually appealing and perfectly choreographed scenes coupled with a mood-setting score to make the story a blissful combination of entertainment and history. Kevin Costner was a top star in 1987 and shows his versatility in the role of Elliot Ness. He can be funny and serious. He can follow the law strictly but fiery on a bad guy when the time comes. The team of agents he acquires are played well by Charles Martin Smith, Andy Garcia, and the legendary Sean Connery, who would win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his brilliant performance of Chicago Police Officer Jimmy Malone. Malone serves as a mentor to the young Ness, who is just 27 years of age in 1930, teaching him the ways of good police work, being honest and fair, but also how to bypass the red tape when needed in the notoriously corrupt Windy City. Welcome to Chicago. He advises Ness after he turns down a blatant bribe to leave Capone and his businesses alone. This town stinks like a whorehouse at a low tide. Only Connery could deliver such a line with a snarling accent and composite demeanor. Everyone knows the name of Al Capone, perhaps the most infamous Italian-American mobster of all time. The film showcases his abilities to rub elbows with the media, who have nicknamed him the mayor of Chicago due to his charismatic nature and control of the entire town. He holds press conferences like a movie star, but also shows his barbaric side and violent temper. De Niro plays the part as well as any could, and his scenes are some of the best in the movie. You can get further with a kind word and a gun than you can with just a kind word. He advises reporters with a smile. And though only in a handful of scenes, a review would be remiss in not lauding the performance of character actor Billy Drago as Capone's top enforcer Frank Kennedy. Together, they make for a pair of unforgettable villains. Mob movies. Music. 10 run with an elevated minute count. The Godfather, A177. The Godfather 2, 200. Music. The Irishman, 209. Goodfellas, 146. Once Upon a Time in America, 250. The latter two sit firmly in my top 108 favorite films. Music list. Despite the absurd lengths, De Palma's other famous mob movie is Scarface clocks in at a robust 170 minutes. While The Untouchables may seem short, just under 2 hours, the pacing is quite slow, particularly in the second act. Music. That said, its start and finish are full of action and excitement. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this movie is that, although it is an epic crime film, the criminal is not an anti-hero figure, but he is a hideous monster that we must despise, whereas the cops are the ones we got to love. This is something that crime drama epics hadn't done in a longer time than O'Neill would think, and the only one that comes to my mind is Sidney Lumet's Serpico. Although one might argue whether you can compare the two movies anyways, it is also another kind of crime epic because the pacing, music, of this film makes it very entertaining. It would be very wrong to call it anything but. In fact, music. Apart from the crimey drama, the film picks up the Sammy tactics that would have been traditionally used in the Western to make the four known as the Untouchables who collect the heroic figures that De Palma wants them to be. In one particular scene, as they stop at the second shipping, De Palma actually music gets a shot of the four of them riding side by side on horses, the Untouchables. In fact, is the story of how Al Capone was turned in for tax evasion by a group of lawmen called the Untouchables. Make no mistake about it, Al Capone is the bad guy, and we know that right from the start before we are even introduced to the good guy Kevin Costner when one of Al Capone's men blows up a corner store and kills a cute little girl in the process. And when you kill a cute little girl, an audience does not forgive you and forget you easily. Most of them will want to see you rot in hell or jail. Unfortunately, one of the disappointments of the film is De Niro's performance, and I don't say that often. He exaggerates and makes Al Capone look like a sort of a caricature, a fool, but is ultimately unable to find an identity for the character of Al Capone and ends up playing a strange surrogate version of all the characters he has ever played. However, Sean Connery's performance steals the show as the tough experience Irish cop that finally gave him his Academy Award. He also gets one of the best death scenes, if not all time, of the 80s certainly. I haven't praised De Palma yet because I'm not sure he is worthy of praise. In fact, music you can almost feel that the movie could have been fantastic had De Palma's direction not been so distracting. I used the word before in this review. That is what gets in the way of this movie becoming one of the crime greats. Together with movies like The Godfather of Once Upon a Time in America, De Palma almost makes every shot seem epic to the point that it starts looking cheesy. The much-praised Odessa sequence is a wonderful work of cinematography, but does it fit in with the pace of the movie, or is it a bit too much to have? Unfortunately, music I believe it is a bit too much. Brian De Palma here is suffering from a narcissistic syndrome that gets to all great directors every now and again. We know they become sucked into their own particular style and make the movie a sort of overdone manifesto of their technical and artistic ways. That is what makes the movie seem overdone, and in the same way, music that is what makes De Niro's performance overdone. Both artists almost making the same mistakes in their relative fields. It still is a movie worthy of praise. There is a great atmosphere to it, for the atmosphere of the Prohibition years so that it builds. Wonderful work of the production designated that builds a great Torah. The pace and rhythm of the film make it is very entertaining, and the plot pretty easy to follow, as sometimes music crime dramas may have hard ones to understand. This makes it enjoyable, I guess, for a wider audience than others. The Untouchables is considered to be a classic gangster film, and for good reason. It has an all-star music cast and hits all the police cliché / copyrights of the genre, emphasis on the police. Despite its outstanding story and the fantastic acting, it's not without flaws. With all of its head explosions and dramatic speeches, it's cheesy, and until I confirmed with Rotten Tomatoes, I was wondering if it was intentional. The Untouchables is the story of Elliot Ness, who assembles a small crew of honest cops to take down the dangerous Al Capone. In the process, he must watch his companions and his family's backstory suffer the harsh reality of the Chicago streets. The first main problem that lead to cheesiness is the score. It's so bloody terrible, with booming orchestras that remind you of a western followed by an electric synth, or a jazz remix. The music is horribly distracting and overwhelms a good chunk of the scenes. I could have taken it more seriously if it had the subtlety, yes, subtlety of Goodfellas music, but with the cacophonous score, I just can't. The cheesiness doesn't end there. Some of the speeches characters give don't come off as effective as the writer would like. Not because of the actors, but because of the stupid analogies or catchphrases. It's hard to take Capone seriously when he's rambling about prize fighting for no reason. While there are genuinely intense and suspenseful scenes, there are plenty of outrageous scenes that leave you with a tonal whiplash. From the intensity of a baby in mass shooting to Kevin Costner catching a goona and Andy Garcia stopping the carriage with his leg. It's not a smooth music transition. Speaking of shitty transitions, the editing in this movie is all over the place. I know this is a snob complaint, but there are many rough cuts and inconsistencies in the editing. The dubbing is absolute too, which is a pet peeve of mine. To be fair, the second half of the movie got better, probably because of the second editor. Now that I've complained, let's talk about the good stuff, which we all know. Music isn't as fun if you can get past the cheesiness that may or may not be there. Then there is an engaging story to be had. The story develops at a good pace, and even though we all know how it ends, the journey is still an exciting one. The acting is stupendous. Music, Sean Connery being his usual big badass, although I don't know if it was Oscar-worthy. De Niro does an okay Capone, but he still is very De Niro. It's not an intense emotional drama like Goodfellas or The Godfather, since it's from the police perspective, but it does also have its fair share of character drama. The Untouchables is a fun and engaging cops and robbers movie, but its classic status is up to question. That's not to say you shouldn't watch it, just music. That I'm too much of a snob. For the first movie I've seen about Chicago since moving there, it's a pretty good one. The Untouchables is available on Netflix, Amazon Instant, Music, Google Play, iTunes, and Blockbuster. Oh, wait. This week I got to rewatch and review Brian De Palma's The Untouchables. If you haven't heard about it, then you aren't the film buff you claim to be. To sum it up, it's a universally loved and celebrated gangster film about the treasury agents who took down the Chicago crime family in the 1930s. Packed with critically acclaimed performances, a solid script by David Mamet, and an unforgettable score by Ennio Morricone. The Untouchables is known as one Brian De Palma's best of films, and on a grander scale, gangster films of all time. That is really saying something, being released in the times of which gangster films were very hot, post-Godfather 1 and 2, with films like Goodfellas released just 3 years after its 1987 release. This film felt right to review. I think it goes perfectly in line and meshes well with the films I've done up to this point. I look back and see a notable influence and focus on certain genres. The gangster or crime genre is something that I obviously love. I also put a huge emphasis on a screenwriter and director, especially recently, as I've gotten to choose the films I review. The Untouchables undoubtedly follows suit. Like most of the others, I guess I'm on the Kevin Costner train now as well after reviewing JFK a couple of weeks ago. He plays Elliot Ness in this film. Ness was the real-life treasury agent who took down Al Capone. He's the voice of reason and leads a criminal chase. As Costner, music seems to do often as an actor. It's very easy to relate and root for his cause. Music, it's a no-brainer. Ending Capone's reign is all he wants. At the time of Prohibition, Capone was maintaining his illegal alcohol distribution by any means necessary. There's a slice of humanity in this that is very important to note. He struggles with the reality and the severity of what he must do. He wants to stop the violence, but to do that requires more violence. It's not a job for the weak, scared, or unprepared, unfortunately. That's how you take down a kingpin like Capone, alone, played by Sean Connery, an experienced and hardened beat cop. Knows this to be true. You don't bring a knife to a gunfight, and you bet there's going to be multiple showdowns. Which is great. Music. For cinema we know you can pull it off. The Untouchables is filled with action, and I don't mean to gloss over Sean Connery's performance. Music. He won an Oscar for it. He fills the role perfectly. An Irish-American cop that lives by his own code. He's a great part of the film, but not nearly my favorite part. Things get even better when you remember Robert De Niro plays Al Capone. I've said it before, he's the best character actor of all time. Hands down. I could never tell you who Al Capone truly was and how he acted. 2020 Capone doesn't necessarily help me out, but knowing that the character isn't the hands of De Niro, I have no trouble buying in. A show-off, loudmouth crime boss, Capone is an angry, violent, and powerful man. You understand that just minutes into the film, we are introduced. Music. In a very regal way. It is the time of Al Capone. I like to believe that first frame, overhead and simple zoom onto Capone getting his face shaved, really sets the tone. You get the music gist of the character right off the bat. Give the film a few more minutes, and Capone is using that bat on some man's head, getting larger to play this role. De Niro has been famed for putting on and losing weight to fill his characters. This one was no different. Through some research, I found his diet was strictly Italian, a lot of pasta, and he even lived in Italy momentarily a few months before filming started. Talk about dedication on a vacation to Italy, and it shines through as De Niro's Capone is without a doubt the most iconic piece to come out of the film. At least for me. The film looks amazing and sounds great. It's very in your face and demands the viewer's attention. That being said, and I say this with the utmost respect and acknowledgement for the power, praise, and accolades that this film has garnered, there are moments within the film that I don't feel aged gracefully. You can 100% catch certain dated aspects of the film, especially in action sequences. The very same action sequences that were praised so much when the film first released. But once you get past the fact that the film is simply a product of its time, you can still appreciate it for what it is. De Palma is without a doubt a director who can bring the juice, but sometimes it can be too much juicy and not land perfectly. It's an absolute powerhouse, but I hope younger crowds will eventually be able to stick behind it. It lacks certain timeless qualities that exist in other gangster films. If The Untouchables made me feel the way that Goodfellas made me feel while watching, I'd consider overlooking some of the clunky and awkward sequences, but for now, it still reigns supreme in the top tier for most people. The film gives you a look into what the 1930s Chicago was like. What kind of fat people were around and running the city. You most definitely get a sense of how things got done, specifically in law enforcement. You can tell how far we've come as a society when you see officers just up and join special treasury agent operations off the beat. It might be me and my lack of knowledge, but that feels like something that wouldn't happen nowadays. Maybe it's all for the dramatics. Music. I'm not too sure. De Palma delivers here, but I can't help but disagree. Music, with certain reports that this is De Palma's best film, maybe his most rounded. It's tamer than other titles of his. I'm sorry, but Scarface takes the cake here for me. It's just too much of a performance out of Pacino not to hold higher. To be quite honest, I'd even rank the music first Mission Impossible over this film just because of what it meant to me as a kid. That all being said, it's still a great film, but not invincible to age and slight mishaps that didn't seem important enough to cut out. As critic Vincent Canby wrote in the New York Times regarding De Palma's 1987 gangster film, it's a smashing work. It's vulgar, violent, funny, and is sometimes breathtakingly beautiful. After this Untouchables, all other movies dealing with Prohibition Chicago, Al Capone, and the lawman who brought him to justice for income tax evasion must look a bit anemic. Boosted by a coruscating, pulse-pounding score from composer Ennio Morricone, De Palma's The Untouchables is actually much more than a period piece or a typical gangster genre film. Instead, It's the passion-laden story of a burg at war with itself and its ideals and the valiant heroes who brought peace into that city at the cost of great personal sacrifice. Now, the setting here isn't classic in any sense. It isn't ancient Sparta like 300 or the Trojan Wars in Troy. But make no mistake, De Palma brings to the Untouchables the same archetypal flourish as we might reasonably expect in any cinematic depiction of Thusia legends. He transforms real historical figures into larger-than-life scoundrels, saints, music and angels. As dramatized by De Palma, The Untouchables is nothing less than the timeless heroic poem of Avenger Elian Ness, written by award-winning playwright David Mamet. De Palma's The Untouchables is a blend of the popular old TV series 1959 to 1963 music of the same name and the popular 1957 autobiography of Eliot Ness penned by Ness with Oscar Frehley. The film depicts Chicago of the Prohibition era as, importantly, a city at war. The unofficial but acknowledged ruler of Chicago is criminal Al Capone, Robert De Niro, a self-satisfied gangster who has bought the loyalty of city cops, district judges, and even the cynical press. Capone is treated as a celebrity and a king and has the run of the city. He's a crook and a monster to be certain, but because Capone has so much money, the tyrant is respected and feared. Nobody crosses him. In light of this situation, we might even dare to view De Palma's film as a veiled critique of capitalism with power going to the highest bidder, and as the film begins, Capone is tightening his grip on the small businesses of Chicago using fear, intimidation, music and murder to making certain that he gets a cut of everything. Into this war zone of escalating violence arrives a straight-arrow crusader, the impossibly moral treasury agent named Eliot Ness, Kevin Costner. Music after his first sting fails to nab Capone, family man Ness realizes he must work around the corrupt system and therefore recruits a group of outsiders that he can trust to the death. These men include his new mentor, an Irish cop on the beat, Jimmy Malone, music, Sean Connery, police academy graduate and sharpshooter Giuseppe Petri, Andy Garcia, and nerdy accountant Oscar Wallace, Charles Martin Smith. Importantly, not one of these men, especially Ness, declares any fealty to the government's wrong-headed policy of prohibition. On the contrary, what this force defends to the death is the very principle that makes America great, the rule of law. This is the meat of Ness's inner crisis. Can the rule of law be re-established by violating the law? Over several tumultuous weeks, Ness puts a dent in Capone's illegal liquor operation in Chicago. But spurs Capone's murderous wrath. The gangster dispatches enforcer Frank Kennedy, Billy Drago, to see to it that the four Untouchables are, in fact, music, quite touchable. Wallace is murdered in an elevator longo with a trial witness against Capone. Malone is set up in his own apartment and viciously gunned down. With his team in tatters, Nessa recognizes that his last chance to stop Capone involves indicting the gangster for tax evasion. To accomplish this, however, Ness needs to intercept Capone's accountant at a train station. Music on the surface, the brutal struggling of the Untouchables appears to be only regarding law enforcement, but the movie's tone and visuals make it plain that this is not entirely the case. On the contrary, this is total war. A fact De Palma makes plain via cross-cutting. Early in the film, he cross-cuts between a Capone declaring violence is not good business, and then a scene involving a little girl murdered in what essentially is a terrorist bombing of a local Chicago saloon. While noting that there is violence in Chicago, but not by music, him. Of course, Capone thus wipes out a buzziness that refuses to go out to his demands for protection money. The bombing is a crime, but a Crimea elevated to guerrilla war tactics. Like music, those seen in the Vietnam War, another De Palma obsession. Another scene involving Ness's first bust sees the hero riding astride a vehicle that appears to be a kind of a 1930s armored attack truck. It's the visual equivalent of putting a soldier atop a tank at the beginning of a battle. Music, a visual recognition that this is, for all intents and purposes, combat. In constructing a mythic poem, it's crucial that the stakes are high. And that's what De Palma accomplishes in setting the key backgrounds of Chicago in The Untouchables. He makes plain that this isn't simply a matter of putting a criminal away, but of winning a war against a powerful and a heartless opponent. The soul of the city is on the line because Capone has his hooks in everyone. Nessus war is thus virtually an Aristotelian thing. We make war that we may live in peace. The spiritual nature of this dramatical war is made evident in one particularly important debate about battle tactics. With the ceiling of a grand cathedral serving as backdrop behind them, Melanie and Ness discuss the pathway to victory. They pull a knife. Music. You pull a gun, suggests Malone. He sends one of yours to the hospital, and you send one of his to the morgue. Hey, that's the Chicago way, and that's how you get Capone. Again, music. How the tenor of this talk is more akin to a war than to crime fighting. In addition, Malone notes that the Lord hates a coward, a sentiment that sounds more appropriate to a conversation in a foxhole, where there are no atheists, than in a campaign to bring a mere fool to justice. What the audience comes to understand is that Malone is a spiritual man, but Tony who believes that anything worth fighting for is worth fighting dirty for. This is a point of view Ness learns much about in the course of the film. In defining music, the central struggle of The Untouchables as a real, dirty war, De Palma even recruits the old-fashioned war movie cliché copyright about a man discovering himself in the crucible of combat, during the Western-style scene set in Montana. The bookish, diminutive accountant, Music Wallace, a man who has never been in a battle, unexpectedly finds himself under fire, a paragon of bravery, taking down a Capone's men in a daring frontal assault. By contrast, Ness ends this engagement underneath the car. If the battle to unseat Capone from his throne of blood is a war, not simply a legal matter, then the men who fight him are great, larger-than-life warriors, and that's part of De Palma's visual vocabulary in The Untouchables, as well. On occasions, the director composes the shots meant to suggest the screen iconography of heroism. Above. Music. I mentioned the interlude set in the wide-open country of Montana. Essentially, the set piece harks back to the Old West, or at least our Hollywood memories of the Old West. And De Palma presents us with scenes of our stout heroes astride horses, carrying rifles and pistols. Music. Ready to heroically engage in combat. The reflexive mental response to these images is to associate the G-men, the Untouchables, with cowboys or gunslingers, the heroes who single-handedly ride in and bring justice to imperiled frontier towns. Cowboys are part of our shared national mythology, as curator George Slesser of the Science Fiction and Fantasy collection at the University of California once observed. They're the embodiment of the American myth of the alone, rugged individual who comes into a society and cleans it up. We all want to do it, but we don't know how to do it. We live our everyday lives that don't allow for this kind of simplistic vision. So, we cheer for a failing to discern De Palma's mode in The Untouchables. Many film critics complain that a Western-style set piece in a Chicago crime movie was distinctly out of place, a glaring faux pas. However, if we gaze at De Palma's purpose here as one of elevating the heroes of The Untouchable to mythic, iconic status, it makes perfect sense that the director should mind the visual language of heroes that Americana generations have shared at the movies. Outside the Old West-style sequence, De Palma on several occasions provides inspiring group shots of the four crusaders shoulder to shoulder engaging in battle. They stride down the streets of Chicago elbow to elbow, an untouchable line of heroism approaching the camera, looming larger and larger in frame and in our psyches. Music in another sequence, as the Untouchables successfully take down a Rancho Capone's operation in a warehouse. The music and the camera work practically a swoon and simultaneous orgasm at the achievement. The camera, music, spins dizzily round the four men doing a celebratory Victoria dance or whirl. This is myth-making, pure and simple. Despite his cutthroat methods, Millennia, music, is practically elevated to the role of saint in The Untouchables, constantly associated with his belief in Christianity, his attachment to his rosary beads, and so forth. Ness becomes the designated carrier of righteousness after a grieving mother of the girl killed in the bombing tasks. Music. In with the sacred mission of capturing and incarcerating Capone, even Ness's wife is treated as a sort of immaculate Madonna figure, forever tolerant, forever supportive, forever accepting of the dangers in her husband's line of work. It probably goes without saying, but these are not the stock characters of your typical crime drama, shaded in a naturalistic grays, but rather bold, iconic warriors remembered for feats of great bravery. De Palma's camera work again and again hammers home this point. For example, Malone is shot 100 times by a machine gun at close range and still alive long enough to share a crucial piece of information with the mourning Ness, the wise, cunning Malone in every way, so the Obi-Wan Kenobi elder of the Untouchables, the mentor and man who guides the hero, Ness, on his mythic, music, Joseph Campbell-style journey. Oppositely, De Palma's technique is also to depict the villain, Al Capone, in a deeply unflattering light. After Capone murders one of his treacherous henchmen with a baseball bat, De Palma stages a terrific shot, a horrified withdrawal or retraction from the bloody action, an overhead shot that seems to literally recoil in horror as spilled scarlet blood contaminates Capone's white table linens. The cross-cutting, mentioned earlier, also serves to create a cause and effect of feeling in regards to Capone. He states that he's not behind the violence, then we see the brutal violence conducted in his name for ourselves. The sequencing of these scenes makes the viewer aware that Capone is a liar, not to be trusted. Finally, an effective villain must be powerful and menacing. And so, in all of Capone's scenes, De Palma positions the gangster amidst almost unbelievably opulence. In the famous baseball bludgeoning scene, Capone dons a tuxedo to gain the appearance of respectability. Later, we see the crook sitting in an expensive seat at the opera house, crying his eyes out during a moving performance, a nod to Coppola's gangster films. Capone's hotel suite is luxuriant to the point of decadence and beyond. Capone controls the city in live amidst absolute wealth with absolute unchallenged power. This is the mountain that Ness must climb on his journey. He must defeat a man who controls all of the channels of power, who possesses vast wealth, and who will use violence, who is deceitful and capricious in his bloody whims. We easily understand all this from De Palma's cross-cutting, production and design, and choice of compositions. The script itself and an erratic interpretation of the character seem to suggest some subtextual resonance of Mussolini, only this is capitalism la duce, a man who has gained the system through money and intimidation. The most impressive scene in De Palma's The Untouchables is one that isn't even in the screenplay. Originally, Ness and Petrie were supposed to nab Capone's accountant on a train, and there was to be a rather elaborate car train chase. When this did not prove feasible from an economic standpoint, De Palma altered the scene to involve the accountant arriving at a train station, and music Ness and Petrie standing by to intercept him there. During the attempted capture, there is a shootout with Capone's men, and music two innocent bystanders are caught in the crossfire, a mother and her baby in a carriage. At one intense point, the carriage topples over the station's vast stony staircase in slow motion. All around, bullets fly, and the carriage shakes and bumps as it careens to the bottom. Again, this sequence is likely the demarcation point where some people will get and appreciate De Palma, and others will simply insist that he is a particularly gifted thief. For in concept and execution, the staircase scene of The Untouchables is an intricate homage to Sergei Eisenstein's 1925 propaganda classic, The Battleship Potemkin. In that film, the famous Odessa Steps sequence dramatized a massacre conducted by the Tsarist regime set atop a wide staircase. Civilians were brutally murdered and these bloody sequences Cossacks killed men, women, and children. Famously, a baby carriage was depicted rolling down the staircase. In original context, the Odessa Steps sequence was meant to demonize the imperial regime, to expose the fact that there was no depth to which it would not sink to hold on to the power in Russia. Music the scene is so famous in cinema history that some people have apparently believed that there was a massacre in the Odessa Steps, Even though the incident was a fictional one concocted for the film, those who accused De Palma of lifting the Odessa steps sequence from the battleship Potemkin should take only an extra step. Music. Beyond that of accusation and ask themselves why. What purpose does it serve to feature a similar sequence here, in this movie? On one hand, we can certainly point to the deliberate homage and the intertextuality we see throughout De Palma's canon. But furthermore, there's a reflexivia quality to this reference in The Untouchables, to wit. Music. The battle for capitalist control of Chicago is occurring roughly in the same time period that the battleship Potemkin was made and distributed. Music. Circa 1925A to 1930. In other words, by cutting and shooting a sequence just like the music Odessa steps, De Palma is actually reflecting something that the characters of the time might have themselves conceivably understood or known about. Much more importantly, however, De Palma has created a thematic relative of Potemkin, a kind of pop form of propaganda, a heroic myth elevating the G-men in stature and deriding a corrupt system and the criminals, like Capone, who exploited it, the capitalist equivalent of the Tsarists. De Palma's point, captured beautifully in a slow-motion shootout, is that Capone's regime, like that of the Cossacks, boasts no moral compunction about the murder of the innocent. It will hold on to control any way it can, as we have seen in the coroner's saloon bombing and now with the imperiled baby carriage. Ness's task is much more difficult. He must eliminate the entrenched, powerful bad guys, the henchmen of Capone, and to defend the innocent simultaneously. Remember how that grieving mother told Ness to get Capone? Well, here Ness lands in an even more urgent variation of that scene, finally in the position to prevent the death of an innocent at the same time that he takes down the guilty. So, yes. Music. De Palma pays tribute to Eisenstein's shot cutting into the famous staircase battle, but he has done two other important things as well. First, he has raised audience ire over Capone's actions in the self-same manner as Eisenstein did in regards to the Tsarists, exposing a corrupt regime in the process. And secondly, he has repurposed the lifted sequence so as to make a point about the nature of the all-out battle Ness is fighting. Amazingly, De Palma crafts an action sequence in the very film language appropriate to the era of his film, the 1920s to 1930s. In his review, critic Hal Hinson called the staircase shootout scene De Palma's greatest stunt. Only half impressed? I suggest that given the context, given the reflexivity, given the repurposing of a classic sequence for a thematic purpose, it is much more than a stunt. This is De Palma conceiving and deploying brilliant visuals to chart for audiences the epic nature of the Capone-Ness conflict. Why does The Untouchables succeed as a grand entertainment and as a work of art? The answer involves our history as a nation. Just over 2 centuries old, America is still a young country at heart, because our ancestors arrived from a variety of other countries. The use lacks the coherent, long-standing mythology of Greece or Rome, of England or music, France. In many ways, the short history of America has involved in the fashioning of a fresh, new mythology that can serve as the sturdy vehicle to carry our ideals into an unknown future. The Old West, the era of righteous gunslingers, is one critical part of that newfangled mythology. As I wrote in the Encyclopedia of Superheroes on Film and Television, I believe that superheroes have, to a large degree, replaced the cowboy in this regard. But nonetheless, in The Untouchables, Brian De Palma takes Ness's G-men, who fought for the rule of law in Chicago, and elevates them to the same epic stature Americans typically reserve for cowboys, war heroes, or Superman. We don't have an American Robin Hood or American Three Musketeers, but the heroic, saintly, and courageous Untouchables. At least in De Palma's cinematic interpretation, more than suffice for the film's running time. A visual exercise in myth-building, The Untouchables is De Palma's mainstream masterpiece, a supreme and rousing entertainment that dispenses with the predictable grittiness of the gangster drama and audaciously serves us up a symbolic fable in its place. I don't know why, but modern Americana history is incredibly interesting to me. And by modern American history, I basically mean everything within the 1900s. What mainly interests me are all the crime stories, especially the gangster-related ones. I have no idea why they interest me so much as they do. They just happen to do so, I guess. And that is what I think fuels my love for gangster movies. So, let's review a gangster movie, shall we? So, in this movie, we follow federal agent Elliot Ness, Kevin Costner, as he puts together a team of non-corrupt cops to find a way to legally take down a gangster boss Al Capone, Robert De Niro, during music, the Prohibition era. Simple premise, excellent execution. The plot lends itself to show some genuinely great drama and surprisingly a good storytelling thanks to the premise being as simple as it is. What is also great about the plot is the pace. This movie moves at a pretty great pace. I never experienced it to be slow at all. I would even dare to say that it was pretty fast. And I liked it. The characters in this movie all feel like real people, probably because a bunch of them are real people portrayed by actors. Examples? Music. Elliot Ness was a real man who formed a real team called the Untouchables, and as you all know, Al Capone existed and was a ruthless gangster. Most other characters are fictional, but still based on some man who existed back then. Anyway, how are the performances in the movie? Top notch, I tell you. Kevin Costner was great as Ness. Sean Connery stole the show, just like in The Rock. As old and wise police officer Jim Malone, Charles Martin Smith was great as his character. Andy Garcia was great as his character. And Robert De Niro was fantastic, as always, as Al Capone. Everybody was great. I don't even have to mention how great the music is. You should know that I loved it. Why should you know such a thing? Because the score was done by none other than Maestro Ennio Morricone, who might be my favorite composer of all time. But yes, he did the score and it's amazing. Next topic. The shots in this movie look great. The camera work is great. It is a great looking movie. Thank you for doing that, Brian De Palma. Now, if you will direct a good movie again, that would be great. Now, instead of ripping on poor Mr. De Palma, let's talk about something good from this movie, the action. The action in the movie is visceral, brutal, and awesome. Whenever an action scene happened in the movie, I cheered because the action scenes are just straight up awesome. Music also, if you hate violence, then you don't want to see this movie. In fact, stay music away from anything that Brian De Palma has directed if you don't like violence in movies. This movie has been very well received over the years. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 80% a positive rating and a fresh certification. On Metacritic, it has a score of 79 out of 100. Roger Ebert gave the movie 2.5 stars, and on IMDb.com, it has a score of 8.0 out of 10. The movie also won one Oscar in the category of Best Supporting Actor, Connery. It was also nominated for 3 Oscars in the categories of Best Set Decoration, Best Costume Design, and Best Original Score. The Untouchables is a very touchable movie that I think everyone should touch. I know that music sounded weird, but trust me, it makes sense soon enough. The story is great, the acting is great, and the music is great. Music, the direction is great, and the addition of the action is something I really liked a lot. Time for music. My final score. My final score for The Untouchables is a 9.89 out of 10. It definitely gets the seal of approval. It's the model of this electric law enforcement film, one of those all-time classics that provides endlessly quotable lines and moments you can't forget. It's crammed with iconic moments, from its brilliantly quotable dialogue from David Mamet, via its wonderful music score, to its artful film literacy and iconic performances. If there is an untouchable film, the one is pretty close. I love it. It's 1930. Prohibition is in full force and Chicago is ruled by gangland kingpin Al Capone, Robert De Niro. Young federal officer Elliot Ness, Kevin Costner, is thrown into Chicago to end Capone's reign and stamp out the illegal liquor business. Not surprisingly, it's hard to know what to trust in a town as stinking as Thieves 1 until a chance meeting with a disillusioned beat cop Jimmy Malone, Sean Connery, helps him find a group of fat people he can trust. Untouchables aren't going to go on Capone's payroll, but to bring Capone down, he's going to have to embrace the Chicago way and start to bend his strict moral code. Listening to Brian De Palma talk about the making of the movie, you can't help but suspect he felt he was doing one for the suits rather than one from Thea Hart. Well, perhaps he should do that more often because The Untouchables is a lean, mean, hugely entertaining action-adventure that plays with genuine ideas but also nails every single moment. Every scene is shot with a confident, compelling swagger, the sort of thing that reminds you what a connoisseur of high-class pulp De Palma can be. The Untouchables plays out like a super brainy graphic novel adaptation and every scene sings. There is barely a deaf moment in there. A lot of this comes straight from David Mamet's brilliant script, really, with lines like this. Moments also well crafted as this. Characters also clearly, brilliantly defined as the onus on show here. You can't go wrong. Quotable lines fall from the actor's lips like the gifts they are. He brings a knife. You bring a gun? He sends one of yours to the hospital, and you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. It's dialogue like this that just has ageless appeal. The sort of stuff you find yourself trying to work into a day-to-day conversation. But Mamet's script is also sharply clever. It swiftly lays out at the start the moral compass, his code, music and then, as the film progresses, it cleverly shows the whys and wherefores of finesse compromising these. Needless to say, music. The man at the end of the film is totally different from the bright-eyed naive agent we met at the start. Mamet also brilliantly works shades of grey into all our heroes while scripting some compelling moments of grandstanding bastardy that an actor as marvelous as De Niro is just waiting to send to the back of the net. De Niro was, of course, the inevitably choices Capone. Bob Hoskins was contracted just in case De Niro said number. When told De Niro would be taking the job, but he would get a $20,000 payout for his time, Hoskins had told De Palma he'd be thrilled to hear about any other movies De Palma didn't want him to be in, but it had to be Bobby. The film drops Capone in the key moments. The film opens with Thea swaggering bully delighted at holding a court with English newspapers Willie being shaved. De Palma's camera draws it down from an overhead shot, like a spider descending from the ceiling, to reveal him in the barber's chair. A flash of danger emerges when the barber slips and cuts Capone's face. Music Niro's flash of fury, followed by his decision to pardon, combined with the barber's terror, is music. Perfect. Later, Capone rages at Ness, hosts a very messy dinner party with a baseball bat, and weeps at the theater while a key character bleeds to death at his home. A brilliant example of De Palma's mastery of B-movie cost-cutting. He's the perfect dark heart. And opposite him, you need a white knight. Even if it's a white knight who is set to be sullied. I'm not sure Kevin Costner ever surpassed the performance he delivered here. The film that turned him into a superstar almost overnight. With his clean-cut, almost perfect Boy Scout appearance, Costner's fresh-faced sincerity is one of his greatest strengths. Yet beneath that innocent exterior lies a sharp, steely edge. His determination to destroy Capone and his disgust toward the violence and corruption surrounding him are always clear, even as his early naivety about how to bring Capone down becomes increasingly obvious. Costner brilliantly captures Ness's transformation as each new event pushes him further toward compromising his principles. Step by step, he begins bending his own rules, realizing that fighting Capone's ruthlessness may require a degree of ruthlessness of his own. What are you prepared to do? Malone asks him, and that question becomes the heart of the film. Ness must discover just how far he is willing to stretch his moral compass. Few films manage to transform their lead character so dramatically without making the change feel rushed or unnatural. Costner's performance is truly remarkable, but the film is practically stolen by Sean Connery, and that's hardly surprising. He gets many of the film's best lines and brings an undeniable movie star cool to the role. It's easy to poke fun at Connery's exaggerated Scottish-Irish cop accent. He attempts it during his first scene but quickly abandons it. What really makes his performance work is the idea of an old cop who never had the opportunity to do the right thing. finally being given the freedom, support, and inspiration to clean up a city drowning in corruption. Connery is a force of nature throughout the film, the perfect mentor and a hardened police officer who, despite everyone's initial expectations, is willing to take enormous risks to bring Capone down. He's essentially a samurai-like beat cop, and Connery, an Oscar winner, tears through his enormous dialogue with the confidence and energy of a seasoned professional enjoying every moment. It's an iconic performance, and it helped launch a remarkable 5-year period of great films and memorable roles for Connery. The film succeeds not only because of its outstanding performances and sharp script, but also because of Brian De Palma's direction. The pacing is absolutely precise, while the camera constantly delivers moments of visual flair and invention. Every action sequence has its own distinct personality, from the energetic horse-riding chaos of the Canadian border operation to the grim late-night slaughter of one of the film's major characters. The latter is a masterful Hitchcockian sequence, using a point-of-view shot to extraordinary effect. A later rooftop chase crackles with brutal energy, but the film's undeniable action highlight is, of course, the legendary train station shootout. Apparently, the original plans for the sequence had to be abandoned because of budget limitations. In response, the cinephile De Palma drew inspiration from Battleship Potemkin and created something extraordinary, filmed almost entirely in silence, apart from gunshots, the sound of a baby carriage bouncing down the station stairs, and Ennio Morricone's restrained score. The sequence is pure cinematic bravura. It's thrilling, tense, and strangely touching, especially for anyone familiar with the history of cinema. De Palma and David Mamet keep the story focused and straightforward, giving every scene a clear purpose and objective. There isn't a single unnecessary character or wasted moment. Everything is carefully constructed to maximize the film's overall impact. The result is gripping, entertaining, and deeply compelling, the kind of movie that, if you discover it at the right age, stays with you for life. Ennio Morricone's operatic score is a perfect match for the film. It strengthens the emotion of every scene, heightens the tension, and pulls the audience completely into the story. Costner and Connery are superb. De Niro is perfectly cast, and the film itself feels like a gift that reveals something new every time you watch it. Film details. Directed by Brian De Palma, screenplay by David Mamet based on The Untouchables, produced by Art Linson, starring Kevin Costner, Sean Connery, Robert De Niro, and Charles Martin Smith. Cinematography by Stephen H. Bury, edited by Gerald B. Greenberg. Music by Ennio Morricone. Distributed by Paramount Pictures. Release date, June 2, 1987. Running time, 119 minutes. Country, United States. Language, English. Budget, $25 million. Box office, $187 million.